Our guest today is Meinl Cymbals artist Jordan Perlson. Jordan lives in Nashville, but he came here via Philadelphia, via Berkeley and Boston, and via New York City. Since settling down in Nashville, Jordan has stayed busy on his path as a drummer for hire and as an eager and enthusiastic educator. An educator of drumming, of course. His list of credits include Becca Stevens, Adrian Belew, Banda Magda, Hiromi, Jeff Coffin, Gary Burton, and Modest Yahoo, just to name a few. His ability to adapt and morph into whatever setting he's thrown into is technically the reason why he can cut the mustard when he's hired for a gig. But speaking from personal experience, I can also tell you that Jordan's easygoing and polite personality is just as important as to why he gets so many gigs. He's also really funny. Jordan's one of those people that I can actually show my super sarcastic sense of humor to without any worry. And not only is he not offended by it, but I get the feeling that he's tacitly encouraging me, as I can tell that he has just as much sarcasm in his blood as I do in mine. My point is that it's easy for me to relax around Jordan, and I think that's because he's one of those people that just puts you at ease naturally. Jordan and I went to lunch earlier in this foul and hellish year of our Lord, 2020. Given that he's a musician, I half expected to see a bitter side to him that I hadn't seen otherwise. And of course, I would not have blamed him, considering just how hard musicians had the rug pulled out from under them this year. But in reality, Jordan was happy and relaxed. He was glad to be out at lunch, and we enjoyed each other's company. Because Jordan's a very smart guy and a pretty hard go-getter, he had previously set himself up with other ways to supplement his income prior to this 2020 mess. And through that additional nature of his that makes him just hustle and go, he was able to breathe a bit easier than most. And that's Jordan. 2 steps ahead, Mr. Prepared, that kind of thing. I really respect that about him. Jordan provided one of my highlights of my time at Meinl thus far, when in a blatant Hail Mary, I lobbed the question at him about if he thought we could get one of his employers, that being the one and only Adrian Belew, down to a studio with Jordan and the rest of Adrian's band to film and record for a Meinl Cymbals video shoot. Since Adrian lives in the Nashville area, I thought it wasn't the worst idea, since it wouldn't necessitate travel. Much to my complete surprise, Jordan came through, and Adrian, Jordan, and bassist Julie Slick all showed up to film live performances for Meinl Cymbals in the studio. Being a fan of Adrian's, that experience was a serious treat. You can check those performances out on our Meinl Cymbals YouTube channel, by the way. So recently, Jordan and I got together to shoot the breeze and let me pick his brain a bit. As always, I enjoyed my time speaking with him. I hope you enjoy the conversation. I'd like to welcome everybody into the Meinl Radio podcast. We've got a really swell guy here today, Jordan Perlson.
Oh, Chris, you're the swell one.
You know what's funny is actually I'm looking at, I've got a list of some notes that I've made of questions I wanted to ask, and do you know how I wrote your name down on the paper? I didn't call you Jordan Perlson. I called you Jordan Peterson. Where was my brain? I must have been in current politics or, oh boy, yeah. You're not Jordan Peterson.
I'm not. And shout out to my friend and amazing guitar player in New York, Jordan Peterson, with the most unfortunate name of the times.
That's funny. Dude, we're going to launch right in. So first of all, I went to jordanperlson-music.com the other day, and I was totally shocked by the photo of you on the home page. So in that photo, you're clean shaven, and I've only ever known you with a beard. So how long have you had a beard now, and what are the pros and cons for anyone out there that may be considering growing one?
Chris, thanks for asking this really important question. I feel like these topics are just avoided because they're charged and they're political, and it's 2020, and people aren't getting to it, and I appreciate that you are.
Well, you know, it's my job to ask the dangerous questions, so I figure facial growth falls under that header, so come on, man, let's offend some people. Talk about facial growth.
My facial growth started about 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, and I think it just came from not shaving a lot. Like I would never shave every day. I would kind of shave, once or twice a week. And my girlfriend was like, you look really good with the stubble. Maybe you should let it grow out. And she would say that often. And then finally I was like, fine, you want to let it grow out? It was kind of like challenge taken. And then she really loved it. And I was like, well, I guess it's got to stay. And that's my hard answer to your hard question.
Well, you've given me the origins of your facial growth, but we need to know the pros and cons. Like, do you miss something about not having a beard?
I definitely don't miss shaving and needing to like, because the thing with a beard is you can let it get scraggly and then you're like, there's that scraggly bearded guy, or you can trim it up and you're like, there's that trim bearded guy. But if you kind of have like a scraggly face of like 5 o'clock shadow or like 3-day-old non-shaven face, I just never could make that work. Some people can make that work, but I couldn't really like land that very well.
Well,
so that's definitely a pro for me.
You're rocking it right now. I dig it.
Thanks, buddy.
Now, you were born in Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, as it is known. Is that nickname appropriate, or do they need to ditch it?
It's pretty sarcastic, I think. Philly's known as being a pretty rough and tumble place. I don't mean that like I come from the streets, West Philadelphia, born and raised, nothing like that. I'm from the suburbs, but I mean everybody knows that like the Phillies and the Flyers have always been traditionally like really rough teams, and their fans have been really rough on opposing teams and fans that come in to Philly to root for the away team. And like comedians know that Philly's a pain in the ass city to play to, and it's it goes on and on. But I'm such a massive fan of sarcasm. I would be very disappointed if we ditched it.
So, do you think that its origins were steeped in sarcasm when someone called it that, or do you think it eventually became a sarcastic notion?
I'm gonna go with the latter. I don't know if Liberty Bell era in Constitution signing era Philadelphia was like a full of dickheads who who didn't want anybody not from the city coming into the city unless they were going to praise them and eat their cheesesteaks. So I think it kind of developed over time. I'm sure it was genuinely full of nice, welcoming people at one point. And it's not that Philadelphians aren't nice and welcoming. It's more of like and I think this is kind of a Northeasterner thing in general. Like the Northeast in general, when you're talking about Philly or New York or Boston, you don't think of like warm people, but like the way you do in the South or in the West. But I actually think Northeasterners are very, very nice people. You just have to play by their rules. Like the example I always give is, if you're on the New York City subway and somebody looks lost on the train, like they're looking at the map and they look confused, you can feel the whole car full of people getting closer to them because they want to give them directions to wherever they're going. Like they want to help and they want them to like know that, like I'm the guy from town and I can tell you where you need to get to, no problem. You want my help. And like everybody wants to do that. And so, you've got all these people who really want to be helpful and help this person out. But as soon as it's like they're done with their directions, like, yeah, take the 6 train to, whichever stop and transfer to the X and blah, 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 blah. And then you walk 2 blocks and you'll be there. As soon as that's done, if the lost person comes back with like, yeah, well, I'm going to my niece's cello recital and I just don't want to be late, like the whole car will be like, you need to go fuck yourself. Get out of my face. I don't want to hear about your niece.
Yeah.
Like they want to help, but they don't want to hear about your life.
Right. That's hilarious. Well, coming up as a young drummer, you studied with one of the legends of the drum world, Joe Morello. I believe you started with him at 17. What was studying with him like?
It was amazing. I was not only incredibly fortunate to have that opportunity to study with him, but I also had 2 years of private study prior to that with one of his like essentially proteges, this great drummer in Philly named Don McCormick. He was my teacher for a couple of years, and being able to like really hone in things with Don and then go to Joe and like really have the kind of the vocabulary of Joe's world and technique kind of already in my bones, really made me able to kind of dig in with him and take advantage of the short time I had with him. I only studied with him for like, a year and a half, 2 years before I went off to college. But it was, aside from getting that incredible information, I also got to hang out with him a lot because Don and him were really, really close. Don studied with him for about 10 years before I started studying with him. And so, I would leave school, and go straight to Don's house. And then we would go up in Don's car. So Joe lived in like North Jersey, which is like a roughly hour and a half, 2 hours from where I grew up. So we would drive up together pick Joe up at his apartment, drive over to the drum shop. I'd have my lesson, which would be like, an hour right on the dot, because Joe just like gives you so much to practice and so much to do, that, an hour is just plenty of time. And then Don would go in, and his lesson would be like 3 or 4 hours, because they just had such a rapport and were so close that, they'd spend a lot of time catching up. And I'd be outside doing homework or practicing or taking a nap, because I'd been up since like, 5:30 in the morning, having gone to school all day. And then we'd go out to dinner, and, at that point I'm like, I'm just so tired, and we still have a 2-hour drive ahead of us to get home. But I got to hang with him a bunch too, which was great. And he was always very generous with stories and information. And a couple times I like dozed off while we were having dinner, because Joe, I'm not going to say Joe was a big drinker, but he liked to have a couple drinks with dinner, and he'd like to hang and chit chat and joke around. And a couple times I dozed off because I was just so freaking tired. I was, a 17-year-old kid in school, been up for however many hours at that point. And he was like, maybe the most important lesson he ever gave me was, he's like, man, the music business is as much about the hang as it is about playing. You got to learn how to hang. And like, if you can't hang late night, what are you going to do? And I was, the smart ass in me wanted to be like, dude, you got up when we got to your apartment to pick you up for the lessons. Like, I've been up like for like 16 hours before that. Cut me a break. But I was just like, okay, Joe, no, I'll learn how to hang. I'll try to stay up later.
Now, wait, did you do this weekly?
I would go like every 2 or 3 weeks, because he just loaded you up with so much stuff. There was no need for me to go every week. That's for sure.
Now, you attended Berklee College of Music on a scholarship, and you graduated from there as well. So I do have a couple of questions about Berklee. What did attending Berklee do for you? Did it, obviously I feel like it, took you to a next level, but I mean, I have to ask, did it? But before you answer those questions, I saw in your description of distance drum coaching, which is a service that you offer through your website, where you said that your instructors at Berklee taught you to listen and play in ways that you couldn't have imagined. And I think I understand, what you mean about playing in ways that you couldn't have imagined. But please unpack for me what you mean about listening in ways that you couldn't have imagined.
Sure. The main teacher who was like kind of the big proponent of kind of critical listening and helped us to listen in different ways was a guy named Hal Crook, who is he's still alive. He retired from teaching, but he was like kind of the improv guru. If you go to Amazon or, Circle, or take a time machine back to like bookstore days and stuff, and go to like the jazz or improv section of a music store, go to the book section, you definitely find his book, How to Improvise. It's like the Bible for learning how to improvise. And even very, very skilled, seasoned musicians still go back to his books. Anyway, I was really fortunate to get to take ensembles with him, because he mostly populated them with like the really good players. And I remember my first ensemble with him was terrifying. I was definitely not ready for it, but he had somebody bail at the last second as the semester was starting. And I was friends with just enough really great players that they recommended me kind of on a whim, I think. And I just got my ass kicked. But that, you asked about listening. That's who Hal Crook is. And one of the things he would, as a drummer, as like a 19-year-old drummer, however old I was when I met him, I'd like practiced a lot and listened to some stuff, but I never really had anybody kind of being like, listen to this and listen for this, or listen to this and listen how X happens, or when X happens, what happens after that, or, just kind of listening from the standpoint of kind of separating all the practice that we do, say with like syncopation and all the Alan Dawson kind of jazz coordination stuff. Like that's a very technical way to prepare yourself. But then you have to listen to music and understand what's happening and why it's happening, to then apply all that stuff you do in the practice room properly and musically. And that's kind of what Hal would, really like drill into us. And that, that's what I remember him drilling into me, and this kind of stuff he would preach. And to be more specific, he'd say, like, listen to the same song 5 times, but listen to it from, like, just listen to the bass. Just listen to what the bass player is doing and how he or she's reacting to what's happening around them, and then listen to it from the piano player's perspective. It's just like I'd never, I kind of was only listening to jazz for a couple of years by that point, and I was just kind of like praying that I knew where the bridge was every time it happened. That's where my head was at. I was still working on understanding form, and Hal was kind of like, that's table stakes. You need to understand why Tommy Flanagan does what he does and how that affects Philly Joe Jones. That's where you need to get your head at. So he really lit a fire under us in that way, which was incredibly helpful and incredibly inspiring.
Wow, that's interesting. I think you may have just articulated something that I've wondered about my own self for years now, where when I was a kid coming up playing drums, people would say, they found out I was a drummer, and they'd say, well, who are your favorite drummers? And I would scratch my head and go, huh. Well, I mean, and there were, a few guys that mattered, but mostly it was guitar players and the way they played that made me think about how I wanted to play drums. And I always thought that was strange, but I feel like I got much more of an idea of what was appropriate to play as a drummer by listening to how the guitar player played and reacted with a rhythm section. And it just made me a bit more intuitive when I started getting in bands and knowing what to do and when, instead of just sucking all over the song,
Yeah, totally. I relate to that too, especially, obviously what I was talking about a minute ago was a little more jazz centric, but like from a rock perspective, I totally empathize with that, because I have this tendency to, like, if I'm preparing for a gig and there's a couple covers or it's all covers or something, and I look it over, and if there's a song title I don't recognize, of course I dig into it and learn it. But sometimes I'll be like, oh yeah, I know Dire Maker, or what, I know, like, I've Led Zeppelin's my favorite band of all time. I know all these tunes, and then we'll get into it, and I'll realize I know all the riffs, I know all the cool vocal stuff that happens. I don't actually know the beat that needs to happen. Mm-hmm. I rarely internalize what the drums are actually doing. I think I have a tendency to kind of take in the what's happening as a whole, and if I need to actually learn specific drum-centric information, I actually have to turn on a specific part of my brain to pay attention to that, and oftentimes write it down, because that stuff's really hard for me to remember.
Wow, interesting. Huh. Well, when you were at Berklee, what did it do for you? What did being there, overall, looking back, what was it you really got out of being there?
I would wake up at 5 or 5:30 in the morning and practice on the drum pad for an hour or two, because I still love practicing on the drum pad. It's still one of my favorite things, ways to practice and ways to spend time. But I was still very much coming out of the Joe Morello world, so I still felt very, for lack of a better word, handcuffed to the pad. I couldn't start my day until I spent time doing that. And so anyway, I'd start my day on the pad, and then I'd have some food and then go to class. And if I didn't have a class for an hour, I'd go practice some more. And as soon as classes were over, I'd probably go play a rehearsal or two, and maybe I made friends with some production majors and they got some practice time in the studios, and I went and recorded in the studio from, say, 10 p.m. to 2 in the morning. And then maybe I ran back to my dorm and did a little homework and studied a little bit, passed out, and started the whole thing over. So, if that was a typical day, I would spend, at least 6, 7, 8 hours with drumsticks in my hands. And that's not including, just the classes that I was learning so much about music, and the people that I was meeting, and the connections I was making. And not so much the connections are important, but the friendships that I was making that would help me to become who I became as a person and as a musician. All that stuff is super relevant to your development and who you become. And I'm still incredibly close with, all the people that when I get in the car to go drive somewhere, all the people I call just to check in and see how they're doing, regardless of COVID and 2020, but especially right now, they're all my best friends I made during that time that I still continued to make music with afterwards, that, helped shape me and turn me into who I am, I think. So lots of musical development, lots of personal development, lots of, just learning and practicing and drilling in all the most important stuff, I think is what I can say about Berkeley.
Well, it's pretty.
Yeah, I had an amazing experience. I need to be explicit. I had an amazing experience there. I graduated in 2004, so it's a remarkably different place now, I'm sure. There's lots of different teachers, facilities, all sorts of things. I can't speak to the way it is right now compared to then, but my experience from 2004 was amazing. And that was like definitely a golden era for me in my own life. For
Wow.
Sure.
That's cool to hear. It's well known that some musicians attend Berkeley and then leave at some point to go out on the road with an artist. However, there are successful drummers like you and another Meinl Cymbals artist that I can think of off the top of my head, Matt Garsko with Animals as Leaders, and you guys attended all 4 years and graduated. So while you were there, was there ever any kind of unspoken stigma about the students that stayed the whole 4 years?
No, I don't think so. I mean, if there was, the longer you stay, the fewer of you there are. That's for sure. At least when I was there, the freshman class outnumbered the other 3 classes by far. And just to drive home that stereotype even more, I was in a triple my first year in the dorms. Like I shared a room with 2 other guys. And one guy left at Columbus Day break, which is in October, and didn't come back. And the other guy made it to the end of the first semester and didn't come back. So like it wasn't even like my 2 roommates didn't even stay the whole year, let alone quit after their freshman year. They basically quit after the first semester. But I don't know if there is a stigma. Maybe people were just being nice to me about it and not like digging on me too hard. But I don't know, like when people would say the kind of things you're saying, like, wow, you stayed the whole time or whatever, I'd be like, yeah, I didn't really have a reason to leave. Like, no one snatched me up or anything for a road gig. I was working a lot in Boston by the time I graduated. I was playing a lot of gigs and playing with a bunch of bands and working and, making money, like transitioning into that period of my life, which was amazing. And that was super helpful, both financially and development wise. And I'm really thankful I didn't stay in Boston like a lot of people do. I'm thankful that I moved to New York when I did, but I don't regret finishing out Berkeley. I was a double major. I stayed for 4 years, but I got through it. I got through a 5-year program in 4 years because I was just really into it and a hard worker and, just kind of barreled through. But I loved it. I thought it was an amazing experience.
Well, going from your education to your career, you have an incredibly impressive resume of artists that you've worked with. And I'm going to list some for people who are listening who may not know enough about you right now, but I'm going to list some of these artists. And I know I'll leave many out because I'm only touching on a few. But even so, to give people an idea as to the depth and range of your abilities in different musical situations. There's Gary Burton, Modest Yahoo, Snarky Puppy, Hiromi, Adrian Belew, Wayne Krantz, Alison Brown, Banda Magda. The list goes on. So if someone like me asked for the cliff notes on which thing led to another, i.e. the main musical milestones in your career thus far, what would that answer be? And then better yet, while you're answering that about those cliff notes on how one thing led to another with musical milestones, be painfully honest so as to help any of our listeners out there who wonder how to get gigs. I mean, there's people who are clueless. And sometimes I wonder if the people who are clueless, there's no hope for. Generally that's an intuitive thing about how to meet people. But anyway, for those people who wonder how to get gigs, what do you feel made you get those main musical milestone gigs?
Sure. That's a great question. There's kind of 2 parts to it. I mean, if we're going to really distill it down, the first part is firstly and obviously musical preparedness, right? Like if you get the opportunity to work with somebody that you're really excited to work with, hopefully you're ready and prepared to do it because you don't want to, for lack of a better term, blow it, So I spent, in circling back to Berkeley and even pre-Berkeley, my goal from the get-go was to just be as versatile as possible. Like, I never wanted to necessarily be in a band. I didn't necessarily want to like be the jazz guy or the funk guy. I just kind of wanted to be the guy that you could call for anything, and I could do it. Not, I mean, convincingly isn't good enough. You know, like anybody can be convincing, in a world where things have gotten a lot more specialized these days. I would say, like, I think when I was in high school, it was you were supposed to be a versatile drummer. You know, you like Modern Drummer magazine was all about, you know, Latin grooves and jazz grooves and rock grooves. You know, it wasn't a specialization thing. So that just kind of was where my head was at. And that's kind of still where my head's at. I think I've specialized slightly more. Like if somebody calls me, say, for like, you know, I'll happily go play Brazilian music. But if somebody says, hey man, like, do you do Cuban music? Like, do you know Cuban repertoire and vocabulary? I'd be like, you should really call somebody else. I don't want to crap all over something that I love to listen to, but I just don't know the right stuff to do. Mm-hmm. But going back to your actual question, I think the real important lesson, and I tell this to students all the time, is any gig. I'm not even going to I'm not going to make this sound pretentious. Say any gig you know me from, but I'll say any gig that I've done that you've heard of. So Modest Yahoo, Hiromi, Blue Man Group, Adrian Belew, nearly all, even Becca Stevens, who's a peer, and I've worked with her for, you know, probably going on about 13, 14 years now. And, you know, she's got an amazing career she's cultivated. Like every single one of these gigs started with my proactiveness seeking it out. I usually made the first move. Like in terms of Becca, I met Chris, the bass player, and we became buddies playing another gig that had nothing to do with Becca or her music. And I just happened to say, hey man, like, I know you guys are in between drummers right now. I know all the music. I love her stuff. If you are ever auditioning more people, I'd love to audition. And, you know, basically said the same thing to a friend of mine that was working with Khaki King, and that's how it led to me working with Khaki King. I think the key is if there's a gig you feel not just that you want, but you also feel right for, like you're the right person for it, there's no shame in making some effort, putting some effort in on your end. It's also, you know, if someone, it's hard to, like we're all going to feel insecure in that moment, but you also have to think about the person that's receiving that call, whether you're calling the artist themselves or maybe a mutual friend that you have with that artist, or just cold calling their management. You know, it's flattering on their end. Of course, hopefully they have all the confidence in the world, but in all reality, we're all insecure, and no one would be unhappy to receive an email or a phone call saying, I think you're amazing. I would really love to work with you if there's ever a great opportunity. Can I send you some links to me playing so you have an idea of what I do? You know, that's not there's nothing wrong with that. If if you do it every day to the same person, then that's harassment. But like if you do it respective, you know, if you show them respect while you do it and it's genuine, there's nothing wrong with that, in my opinion. Yeah. And that's how, you know, the vast majority of the gigs, you know, it's you know, again, quote unquote, all who, you know, I knew somebody involved in those organizations. Actually, with the exception of Adrian, I just emailed him through his website when I moved to Nashville. But I did eventually get that opportunity through a mutual friend. It didn't just come from that email, but I did, when my name did come up through our mutual friend, they were like, oh yeah, we've heard of him. Why do we know his name? It was because 4 years prior to that, I was like, hey, I just moved to town and I know all your music. Want to jam? You know, and nothing came from it because they were like, cool, this weirdo lives down the street apparently. Let's not jam with him. But then when someone else they trusted said, hey, you should really call Jordan. I think he lives down the street from you, actually, so rehearsals will be easy. They were like, yeah, his name sounds familiar. Anyway, call him, see if he's available. And then, you know, once it got going, I was like, I actually emailed you, you know, back in whatever year that was. And his wife, who runs his website, was like, that's why I know your name. Yeah. But, so, you know, that all, anyway, just to put, you know, just never, I don't think people should fear being proactive about it. It's not just that the phone's going to ring all on its own. You can put it out there too.
Yeah. I think if you had to really distill it down to an age-old cliche, it never hurts to ask.
Exactly. One of the things I tried to employ in life, not just with gigs, but like, anything is, worst they can do is say no. Like that's like, like if you get a no, whether you're asking for a bank loan or a gig or, extra cheese on your burger, like whatever, they just said no, like moving on.
Yeah, I mean,
you know what I mean?
Probably the only way you'll know where you've taken things too far is if you get served a restraining order.
That's what I mean. That's like, if you're calling them every day saying, let me play in your band, or if you're, calling someone you're attracted to every day saying like, let me take you out. Yeah, then you're crossing lines. But
or if like you just happen to show up outside of that girl's window, just like staring in, like, and she just happens to walk by and sees you standing there, that you've taken it too far. Quit.
Yeah, and if you're not holding a boombox over your head while you're doing it all wrong.
Yeah. That's funny. I mean, out of all these artists you've worked with, has there ever been one or a couple where you've had to dial back being sort of starstruck, and maybe not even starstruck, maybe they weren't big stars, but maybe you just loved and connected with their music so much prior to getting the gig that meeting them and actually putting a human thing to this person whose music you've connected with was, kind of odd?
Yeah. I would say definitely Adrian Belew, definitely Charlie Hunter. Those two guys come to mind because I've been fans of their music and their playing since I was like in junior high. I was, as far as Adrian stuff goes, like Primus was my favorite band in junior high. And I the music store I took drum lessons at, I eventually started working at, and we would all just play our own CDs. And I remember putting on a Primus record, and one of the older guys was like, this just sounds like sillier, younger King Crimson. And I was like, well, I should probably check that out if that's the case. And I just on a whim bought Discipline, which if you're a King Crimson fan, everybody knows that's the record, and fell in love immediately, and then went down the rabbit hole. And when the opportunity to sub in his band prior to joining it, I did a couple gigs subbing, came up, he said, hey, since we live so close, do you want to get dinner before we do any playing? I'd love to get to know you. And I was just like, I'm going to go have dinner with Adrian Belew. And and the funniest part was a friend of mine pointed this out. He's like, you can't seem to not refer to him as Adrian Belew. Like you can't not say the full name. And I was like, yeah, I don't know if that'll ever wear off. It did eventually. But that was certainly like, yeah, starstruck is maybe not quite the right term. It was more just like a
severe admiration.
Severe admiration and like an out-of-body experience sitting across from him at a booth in a Mexican restaurant, drinking frozen margaritas and eating chips, talking about music and talking about life. And then same experience playing with him. I was like, I just couldn't believe I was playing frame by frame with him the first time. It was just a totally literally unbelievable. I could not believe what was happening moment.
So when you guys sat down to jam the first time and he had to hear you behind him, what was the first tune you guys played together?
I think we did play frame by frame first. And Chris, I may have told you this story already, but obviously there might be a few other people listening. So the first time we played was at his house here in Nashville. And I got there and his PA system wasn't working and something was wrong with his rig. So he literally couldn't get any sound through his amp. Because he's a super complicated rig. It's not like a, one or two chords. It's like 1,000 things happening. And so he looked at me. He's like, do you mind if we just play real quiet? Like play acoustically? And by acoustically, he meant like he was going to play his Parker Fly not plugged into anything. Not like he didn't go grab an acoustic guitar. It was like he was still playing his Parker, just not plugged into anything.
Wow.
And yeah. And as we were playing, it dawned on me. I was like, here I'm playing this music that I love behind a singer who I really admire with lots of odd meters, and I'm playing insanely quietly. I was like, this is the culmination of the last 20 plus years of work it's all been leading to this moment. This is every skill I've tried to hone all in one moment.
Wow.
So supporting a singer, playing super quietly but confidently, odd meter stuff, yet playing songs and some improvising for sure. I was like, it's all right here, like boiled down into this hour-long rehearsal.
Dude, the playing, that's pretty amazing that it all distilled down to that. And the playing quietly and confidently while playing quietly, that is, out of all the skill sets you listed, man, that is one that is hard to do.
I hear you, man. I had a complex about volume and dynamics and just being able to play quietly ever since I was a kid. And it really came to a head when I moved to New York and started working because, 90% of the situations you're in, you're either rehearsing in somebody's bedroom, or you're playing a gig in a coffee shop that, is the size of like the kitchen of the coffee shops in Nashville. That's just like the whole business. You're playing in these tiny, tiny spaces, and it just became, I think it became a little bit of a sink or swim situation. It's like, figure out how to make this work right now or don't work at all. And I think a lot, I think that's like a kind of a special weapon that New York drummers all have in their back pocket, is like they can, whip out some pretty strong, confident sounding stuff at very low volumes, regardless of what genre you play. If you're a jazz drummer, if you're, a groove guy or whatever, like everybody, I feel like New York drummers just tend to have a wider dynamic range just because of the environments you play in.
And I dig that too, because it's interesting. It's an odd thing that it reminded me of, but like when my daughter was a toddler, and toddlers are prone to having temper tantrums as they're trying to figure things out and boundaries and whatnot. I learned really quickly that yelling when I lost my temper would not get her attention at all. She wouldn't listen. And so what I started doing was whispering to her. It's a funny thing when you're really angry to start whispering. I mean, it's like, it's hard. But I did it. And the first time I tried it, she just stopped. She stopped everything and just listened. And it's sort of like a necessity. She had to. But there was a lot of potency in being quiet, a lot of effect. It like really did something and connected with her, and she heard it. And so I don't know. I've always been sort of fascinated by things that are quiet as opposed to just loud all the time.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's fascinating and really interesting. And if I ever have toddlers I'm dealing with, I hope I can call back upon this moment and use that.
I don't really know if it's relevant to what you were saying, but
well, I think that it is. I think also, the thing that I like. So one of the gigs I get a lot of questions about is Becca Stevens, because a lot of the parts that, she writes really kind of clever and interesting and intricate and unique songs. Like it's very compositional, but they're still at the heart of them, they're songs. So I feel like I kind of, and it's definitely an intuitive thing. I don't try to come up with anything in one direction or another. It's always at the heart of it. It just needs to be supportive of what she and the rest of the band are doing. And it's always so interesting and creative what she's doing. It usually inspires me to ditch the hi-hat and pick up another sound instead. And, if I'm going to be playing, like I said, like using different sounds, but also keeping, making my, all dynamics are relative, right? Like there is no decibel reading for pianissimo. It's just an idea. Very, very soft is just an idea. So if we hit the first chorus of a song and that's supposed to appear as loud, I'm setting my loud meter relatively to whoever's listening. Because if I know 2 choruses from now, it needs to be quadruple forte, it's my job to kind of keep it relative and create that range for that song. Mm. And I think it's just a matter of trying to do, like people will say like, how do you play so quiet, or how do you come up with these parts? It's like, just decide that you're going to do that and work on it and try to execute. I'm sure I didn't do it great the first 100 times that I tried it, but when I first started playing with Becca, we were fully 100% acoustic. Chris was only playing acoustic bass. Becca was playing only acoustic guitar, uke, and charango, and Liam was only playing accordion, and they all sang. So there were so many microphones on the stage all the time. It was like, if I got a little bit, if I colored a little bit outside my lines, it was like feedback and sounded awful and really difficult to manage. And so I was just forced to like make it work, stay inside these lines. And it wasn't clearly defined. It was just like, how do I make this sound great and make all these 3 people feel really comfortable and supported and in a place where they can make the best music they can make. And it just kind of forced me to like, okay, I'm going to like keep my ceiling right here. But just because my ceiling for volume is, 2 feet off the ground doesn't mean I can't start at 1 inch off the ground. Like I can make pianissimo 1 inch and leave the 2 foot ceiling as, quadruple forte.
Sure.
It's just a matter of setting those relative markers or whatever you're doing,
Who are some dream artists that you haven't worked with yet that you'd like to?
I should have seen that question coming.
Yeah. That's an easy one, but it's an interesting one. I'd like to know, let's just say that randomly one of these dream artists gets the Meinl Radio podcast put in front of them by somebody. That won't happen, but we're going to pretend it'll happen. So it's okay if you don't have anybody, but like if you just thought, man, I would love to do that gig, who would it be?
One person that comes to mind is Jacob Dillon. I really love his solo records, and I love the Wallflowers. But at the same time, his solo record, Women in Country, is one of my favorite records. And one of the reasons it's my favorite record is because Jay Bellerose is one of my favorite drummers. And as much as I love that music and as cool as it would be to work with him, like I don't know, I don't think any other spirit for the rest of humanity will ever be able to do what Jay does. So it's as cool as it would be to try to do it, I don't know what I would do.
Yeah.
But God, I don't know why I can't. I'm embarrassed that I'm not thinking.
No. I mean, I get it. It's
people.
when you get put on the spot about stuff like that, it's not so easy to recall. It generally that kind of thing probably would come to you when you're on a road trip driving and you're listening to something and you're connecting, going, God, I would love to do this gig.
Yeah, I would love to work with Jeff Tweedy sometime. I'm not like, I really, really like Wilco, and I like his solo work, and I like a lot of the stuff he's produced. Most of the reason I'm so drawn to it is because I don't know so much if it's his approach or Wilco's approach or who's kind of driving that truck, but I love the idea of, I've got this song. Let's still make it sound like a song. Let's still make it appear as a song, but dress it up in all these other interesting ways that are still, they're out of left field, but they're still listenable and they're still musical and sensible. It doesn't need to be, I don't like weird for weird's sake, but I love surprises. And I think, Jeff Tweedy in most of his projects does just that.
What was the name of the documentary years ago when they did? Is it you were something like You Were Trying to Kill Me, or This Is Trying to Kill Me, or?
Oh yeah, what is the name of that? I can't remember off. I mean, he has a song called "I Am Trying to Break Your Heart."
I think that's the name of the. I think that is the actual name of the documentary. It could be totally wrong, but that was. Did you ever see it?
I did years and years ago, but it made a huge impression on me.
Yeah, I mean that's when they were still struggling, and it was the one part in the video where there's the dude that used to be in the band with him, and the guy he was like sort of co-producing the record with him, and he was just merciless on Jeff the whole time. I think he was actually more of a hired gun, but he was acting like he was the boss. Oh, that was hard to watch. Fascinating DVD.
I feel like you're referencing the moment in that whole documentary that also sticks out in my mind, and I feel like Tweedy turns to either the camera or the documentarian and just like puts his hands at his side, and he's like, "You see what I'm dealing with?" And it wasn't funny. It wasn't sarcastic from what I remember.
No, and it's one of those really honest looks into something where you can tell like, oh, that dude's gone. He's gonna be gone. Like after they're done with this album, he's out of there. That's kind of a random note, but and I'm going to switch gears completely here. There's two instruction books that you've written, and they're still being sold, as far as I know, by the publisher Mel Bay. One of them's called First Lesson Cajon, and the other one's called Learn to Burn Drum Set. And so how did those two books come about, and did you personally decide on the name Learn to Burn? Because that doesn't sound like something I could hear you saying.
What are you talking about, Chris? I rhyme words all the time for the sake of rhyme. No, so I need to answer that first, just so we're really clear. I didn't come up with either of those titles. Okay. those are, as far as I know, like, Mel Bay has a first lessons series and they have a learn to burn series. The funny thing so the first lessons is pretty obvious, right? They want to keep it simple. You're picking up the cajon for the first time. You're picking up the guitar for the first time. Give us 30 pages, like the first 30 pages of what you need to know about this instrument is the description of that, which is great. That's a lot for an author to go on. So I did the cajon one first, and that was relatively easy just because it was like I was like yeah, I'm also not an amazing cajon player. I can't tell you much about flamenco or Peruvian music. I just transfer what I've got in my head rhythmically from drum kit to cajon and can do it fairly convincingly. That's what I've got. And so I was like, I can teach people how to do that for sure. I can't teach you about bulería or tango, but I can teach you about that. And when I finished that and they were, submitted it, a couple months later, my contact there reached out and he was like, hey, we're really thrilled with how first lessons cajon went. And I had said to them, I have a few ideas for my own books. Could we talk about that after, the cajon book? And they said, yeah, no problem. And when they got back in touch, I was really hoping it was like, hey, so what are the books you want to write? And they were like, hey, we got another book we'd like you to write. And I was like, well, okay, I can write another one, that they're asking me about. I was like, what is it? And they said, it's called Learn to Burn for Drum Set. I was like, cool. What does that mean? Like, what is the premise of it? They're like, we don't know. We just have the title.
Wow.
They're like, we're resurrecting this Learn to Burn series, and we want to start it off with the drum set one. I guess they had done it previously. And I was like, okay, well, who's the target market? Like, what level, what demographic? And they were like, whatever you want to do, which made it really hard. When you don't have so many lines to color within, it makes it tougher. So I just decided, I was thinking back to my, formative years, and I was like, okay, let's say I'm in the space of I just figured out how to play Hot for Teacher, which was as a high schooler, one of the benchmark goals for me. And I made it through, and I can do that, and I can read through all these books that I've got, and I can you basically get to a point where you're like, I can do all this stuff, but I still don't I'm still not burning. I haven't learned to burn yet, but I don't know what else to do. So I basically, each chapter is stuff that's pretty doable for, I'd say, an intermediate level player that they maybe wouldn't think to have worked on yet. So kind of expanding vocabulary, expanding some coordination stuff, and kind of expanding ideas for that level player.
Gotcha. Interesting. Well, last question about that. How did you actually get connected with Mel Bay?
Yeah, so Mel Bay's, I believe it's his grandson, whose name is escaping me right now, who's not in the business anymore. He went and started his own non-music related business, went to college with Becca Stevens, Liam Robinson, and Chris Tordini, all the rest of Becca Stevens' original band. And when, years later, as we kind of got going, he got more involved with his family's business, which was Mel Bay. And he asked me, he's like, we're trying to, cajon's getting popular. We'd really love to get a cajon book out there. And I've seen you play with Becca 100 times. Do you want to write the cajon book? And I was like, hell yeah, it sounds awesome. So that's how that relationship began. And I haven't done anything with them since Learn to Burn, but that's how the whole thing began.
Well, you relocated from New York City to Nashville. And the cliche is that New York City is for jazz and Nashville is for country. But we all know in this day and age, each city has a really diverse assortment of musicians. After having lived in two of the main music cities in the U.S., what are your thoughts on each, and which town is good for what?
That's a great question, and something I think about and talk about with friends all the time. I will say I feel like the pro and the con list for each city is they're like a mirror image of each other. Each one has such great stuff about them and has terrible stuff about them too. And I just feel like New York was just so perfect for the 22 to 35-year-old Jordan. And then at a certain point, I was like, I think I need to experience something else in a different way of life. And after doing a lot of research and soul searching, I was like, I think Nashville might be that experience. And I came down here and I feel like Nashville is the perfect place for, 35 to question mark age Jordan. And that's the very general response. But yeah, it's New York. They're both cities have all styles. I don't associate one style with either city. I know country's obviously traditionally Nashville, but it hasn't been only, Nashville hasn't been only country in forever, and New York hasn't been only jazz in forever. Of course, we have all the mythology that goes along with it, but in reality, hasn't been that way in a long time. But I find there's lots of great musicians to play lots of styles with here, and there's some amazing musicians to play lots of styles with in New York. I'd say things kind of lean certain directions, but they're both super diverse cities with lots of great players.
I think what you said about the mythology is really important. What you don't hear is somebody saying, I'm going to move to Nashville to play jazz. You don't hear somebody say, I'm moving to New York to play country. Now, granted, I'm sure there's clubs in New York City where you could go and play country and there would be an audience for it. In Nashville, I think we finally just got our first jazz club a year or two ago. So the mythology is still incredibly important in directing where people actually decide to move to try and further their career. Despite the fact that you've got players in each city that can cover all kinds of ground. But yeah, the mythology aspect of it is neat. I mean, I love it that you have all that history in New York City of all the people that have passed through it to play that music. I think it kind of like when you show up there as a jazz head, it inspires you. And it's the same thing with, in Nashville. If you show up as a songwriter here in town and you grew up loving all of those people from way back when, I don't know. I feel like that's an important thing. Even if it's still a diverse city, it's important to connect with that kind of roots of the city itself.
Absolutely. And, and to be transparent, I didn't move to Nashville to play jazz. I do play jazz. Like I said, earlier in our discussion, I've just wanted to be the guy that could do anything you need. And jazz is one of the things that kind of stuck with me. Like I said, I don't play a lot of Cuban music, and I certainly couldn't play orchestral music or anything like that. But jazz, I think I can confidently list jazz and most of like the subgenres on my list of like, yeah, I can do that for you. But I definitely didn't move to Nashville with the intention of like furthering my jazz career here. I just wanted to expand my musical network to the folks here and see where that led me. If it led me to playing more jazz, that's fine, but that was not an intention.
Yeah, sure.
But one of the first people I met when I moved here was Jeff Coffin, and we played tons of jazz together, and he's unbelievable. So there's no complaints there, but it's definitely not a jazz-centric city. There are good jazz players, though.
Right. Well, I've got one last question for you, and I had to get to this question sometime. How are you making your way through the current state of things right now?
Yeah, it's tough, but I feel very fortunate. I have a really good remote recording setup, and thankfully people still hire me pretty regularly for projects and keeps me pretty busy there. I do some teaching both remotely and in person with masks on, and I also have a small kind of side job with a company called Sound Better that I've had for several years now, and we facilitate remote work for musicians. So we got very, very busy at the start of quarantine, and as hectic as it can be, balancing all of those things, it's also really great to be on the side of helping more musicians not just survive but also thrive. Some people are doing great via that platform, and it's awesome to be help with the facilitation of that.
Has there been anything with downtime that you found you've reconnected with musically that's been a positive for you?
I've definitely been practicing a little more than I had, say, last year. 2019, I spent 8 months on the road when all was said and done, which was brutal. It was great. I played so much amazing music and got to go to a lot of really cool places, but it definitely kicked my butt. And I definitely didn't practice like at all year. I warmed up for gigs, but that's about it. And then there's certain days where I'm like, wow, I guess I could just practice for the next hour or two. I'm just going to do that. And practicing is it's definitely my first love. Like, I love to play gigs. I love to record. I love to interact with musicians, but just the act of like being in a room alone with a metronome and a drum kit and or a drum pad and like, either a very specific plan or a loose plan of what I'm going to work on is like, that is my absolute undeniable happy place. And to be able to like just casually get to that headspace, more often than I have in a long time has been really awesome.
That's great. I'm glad you get to do that. It's refreshing to hear some positivity out of this whole thing. But I hope I didn't lob too many weird questions at you. We got started with the beard thing, but other than that, I wanted to keep it on point.
It's true, and I wanna mention one thing that I'm wondering if you even know this, but do you know that Matt Halpern and I are connected long before Meinl? Is this an awareness that's
yes,
in your
I'm aware
spirit?
of it, but
okay.
I don't really know the connection.
We went to the Berkeley 5-week program when we were like 16 or 17 and became buddies. And I don't know. I was in the back of my mind. I was like, I wonder if Chris is gonna bring up when you brought up Berkeley. I was like, I wonder if that's where this is headed. But I just wanted to make sure that it was acknowledged and give a shout out to Matt, who's a great dude and just unbelievable drummer.
Yeah, we all love Matt.
Yeah.
Jordan, dude, thank you so much for being on the podcast, man. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, man. It's an honor.
And I guess the next time I'll see you will be at like the Greek place for lunch.
Yeah, you want to just meet there around like 12:30?
Totally. Thanks, dude.
All right, man. Talk to you later.
Thanks for listening to Meinl Radio. If you liked this episode, please head over to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. We would appreciate it very much. Thanks, and we'll see you soon.